Hand it over. I want to present Jim Patterson. If you had the opportunity to see Jim speak during the education event in February, he did an amazing job. Fantastic speaker. Jim Patterson's the CEO of Patterson Advisory Group. It's a consulting group focused on startups. He's worked more than 25 years with new ventures, and over the last 3 years has been helping ACN build and grow MVNOs across the globe. So without further ado, Jim, let me hand it off to you. Thank you for your help, and we appreciate everybody being here today. Cheers.
Sounds great. It's great to be here, and really look forward to talking to you a little bit about what's going on. As a part of my consulting practice, and frankly, just a few weeks after I spoke to many of you in Denver, I got a call to start doing some serious thinking about what this COVID-19 looks like, and this is the culmination of about 8 weeks of pretty detailed research. And when we've updated it, I'll give you an idea of that. As most of you know, sorry to give a shameless plug, I've been writing about this extensively on a blog called The Sunday Brief, sundaybrief.com. You can sign up. It's free, and you get what you pay for, I think is a nice way of saying it. But we've been talking at length about what this looks like afterwards, and I'm going to take you through around 10 slides that matter in this deck, and then Dan's going to make it available to everyone that participated in the conference. So you don't need to take too many notes, but or snap or do any screenshots. You'll be able to get the whole presentation here shortly. Maybe.
And Jim, while you're getting that going, just to remind everyone, as Jim's talking, if you have any questions, just submit them at the bottom of your screen. Click on Q&A, type them, and we'll get those after Jim's done presenting.
There we go. Okay, so what we're going to talk about here, the first couple of slides are about what did the situation look like economically before COVID-19, and I'll take it on again. I'll kind of pan back a little bit for the national view, and then I'll hone in a little bit more on the West and specifically on Colorado. The economic situation prior to this was quite fragile. You were either doing really well or you were living paycheck to paycheck. We all know people in both those camps. 50% of Americans prior to this were living paycheck to paycheck. Those living paycheck to paycheck needed about $2,200 more to kind of break that cycle. The big portion of it, if you look at that lower graph, where that housing costs were too high. I think you guys are seeing that pretty prevalently in Colorado. I'm giving you this broadcast not from my Fraser house, but from Lake Norman, North Carolina, in the Charlotte area, and we're one of the highest increased housing costs. We're still relatively cheap compared to other areas, and we'll talk briefly about that. The second area was just not enough income, and as we all know, people, and many of us may have even participated, had what we call second jobs or side gig or whatever you want to call it, and those dried up. A lot of those dried up with this COVID opportunity, or shifted dramatically. So what's happening now is you're seeing a lot more people kind of going credit card payment to credit card payment, and they're weathering the storm, at least until the card maxes out. Hopefully we're being sensitive to the needs of those who are doing that, and helping out however we can. On top of that, just the overall income side is what I call the balance sheet side, our savings. This was where the savings were for age and demographic prior to COVID-19. And as you see in that slide under none, approximately a quarter of the folks who were surveyed, and this is a pretty big survey, about a quarter have no savings, and about another 22% have less than 3 months. However, and I guess maybe the other piece is there was growth, a lot of growth in the economy coming into this year. And I added this slide for those of you who've seen the previous version. I've added this slide into the presentation. And it's good news, frankly, for the West in general and for Colorado in particular. This is the annualized growth between the third and fourth quarter, by state. So you can see in the dark blue, Texas, Colorado, Arizona, Washington State, Utah, a lot of fast-growing areas, but again, concentrated in the West. And then in the South and Southeast, the Carolinas, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida were all doing pretty well. Kentucky's doing well. Tennessee was a little slow in the fourth quarter. Even Mississippi was, growing at a rate faster than New York. And Louisiana was a little slow. Louisiana and Oklahoma are slow due to oil-related slowdowns that were already going on in the fourth quarter. The Northeast was also choppy. The Midwest was very choppy. And again, some of that relates to agricultural needs. Some of that relates to manufacturing needs. But the key matchups, the things that, if you've been reading the Sunday Brief and other things, key matchups are what's going on Texas versus New York, what's going on Texas versus California. That kind of gives you an idea of where the shift is occurring within the country, and what I call south and western pull is doing in the country. There's some eastern pull from California, but really what we're seeing, and we'll show that here in a slide in a second, is a lot of pull out of rural into urban, wherever you are, but specifically out of rural into and out of the east, and to some extent the west, not as much, into the south and into the south central parts of the country. What's interesting is that Texas was growing 1.3x California. I think that's indicative of just different growth rates, different things, but 2.9% growth on a GDP, so to speak, the size of Texas is pretty substantial. But this is data that actually came out during the virus, which is kind of odd. But this is a 10-year view, important to note here, and this all comes from the U.S. Census. So this is what was called the United States Census final report. And I think what this shows, if you kind of look at the left-hand side of the one that's green, are the absolute number growth, as you can see there in the legend. 5,000 or higher is dark green, and then on the far end, kind of the burnt orange, is a decrease by county of 2,500 or more. On the right-hand side is the percentage growth, and as you know, both matter as we're looking at where is wireless infrastructure growing, where are broadband needs growing, and there, as you can see, there's still a lot of growth in the Mid-Atlantic area. As a percentage, it's smaller, but growth both on a absolute and on a percentage basis is, you can look at Central Florida, you can look at Houston, you can almost draw the outlines of Houston, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, Phoenix, Salt Lake, Portland, Seattle. I mean, you can almost see all that. California, as a percentage, is still growing in population, and certainly by numbers is growing. But as you saw from an economic value perspective, it's a little bit different. I'm going to spend a lot of time on this slide. This is probably where we'll spend most of our time today. And this slide is as we wrote it, as several of us were kind of working on this, as we wrote it literally 4 weeks ago today. So some things have changed and some things are incorrect, but this is where when we had to kind of put our collective brains down and kind of think about what was going to happen, this was our best guess a month ago. So, of course, the outbreak, at that time, Trump was talking about reopening Easter Sunday. Thankfully, that didn't happen, at least here from North Carolina. Thankful that it didn't happen, because we're still peaking right now. But this does look pretty accurate, at least in certain areas of the country. Some restaurants start to reopen where you can social distance. Relief checks, if they're not already in place, if you didn't have direct deposit, will start showing up probably in the beginning of May. At least here in North Carolina, we're pretty sure schools are going to reopen at least for a month or 6 weeks. In North Carolina and some other areas, they're talking about a shortened vacation period. Not good for Colorado tourism, but good for education and as a whole. School year begins starting in, depending on where you live, late August or mid-August through mid-September. And, that piece, and I hear more people talking about it, is, what happens over that tourism season is directly dependent on the distance or the duration of that period. Some travel, as you know, will resume. We're all reading the articles and be interested to see what it will take to get on a plane. It looks like it's going to take a lot. And I also highlight there, we're going to see some financial system strains. Many of you have seen there have been bank earnings this week. So far, everything seems to be holding together very well. Thankfully, we put a lot of safeguards in place after the crisis a decade ago to make sure those balance sheets were strong. I think based on this, I might change a few things. The unemployment strained state systems we predicted would happen kind of mid-August. That might be mid-June based on the amount of unemployment that's there. We're not seeing anything on credit card default rates yet, so we're kind of predicting we'll start to see some headlines there in about a month. And again, this is you might have to take an extra drink for this, but we will see a lot of bankruptcies. Maybe not tomorrow because of what's called the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, but still those companies that were weak coming into this are going to be weak coming out of this. There is no magic cure for this for a poorly run or secular declines in any given business. As you guys know, we spent a lot of money, and there's you see the estimates as much as $4 trillion just in loan support and paycheck protection and these checks going out. And, eventually it's going to catch up with us. There was a good interview this morning on CNBC with Larry Fink. If you guys you want to watch one good, it's 20 minutes, but it's a good interview. Watch Larry. He's a great person, and his insights on the market are very, very good. At the bottom is kind of what's going to happen from an earnings perspective and what you're going to hear. We're in the middle of the Q1 results right now. You're going to see a lot of companies pulling guidance. In some areas, you'll see cuts or pull or suspension of dividends, and you're going to see varying losses. And that, by the way, that's exactly what you're seeing right now. You're seeing a lot of financial firms. You'll see some telecom earnings. We can talk briefly about that. And then after this presentation, and then we'll talk a bit about what's going to happen as far as telecom industry versus other industries. Just remember, many of those business customers, wherever you are, be they wireless, be they wireline, those small business customers are wireline customers as well as wireless customers. And so eventually, if that business closes, that revenue is going to go away. What we'll see in the second quarter, and I feel very confident in this, is as people kind of get over what does it look like now? Again, you'll start to see second quarter earnings in about 3 months, mid-July to end of July. More reductions. Again, not a very pleasant picture. This is reality. You're going to see a continuation of contraction in the economy. You're going to see what's called discretionary spending, consumer discretionary spending. That's going to decline a lot faster than people think. And I just call them disturbing trends. We'll all see what those are, but you're going to see some trends that are going to be both societal and economic that are going to be kind of concerning. In the middle of all this, we have an election. As if we didn't have enough things to get us excited, we'll have an election in the middle of all this. What you're going to start to see coming into Q3, this is my prediction, and I feel pretty confident in this based on what I'm seeing so far, is you're going to see some pressure on operating margins. You're kind of getting into the new normal by the third quarter. You start to see results. You're going to see margins really pressured, and that impacts things like how do we think about capital spending in 2021? How do we think about our hiring needs in 2021? How do we increase our operating profits? And historically, this is a prediction, right? And you guys can hold me accountable for it next time we get together. But I think you're going to see more price ups at the Verizon term for price increases. Wherever they can take it, they're going to take it. So I was listening to a related thing on the airline industry. They were talking about the increased cost of the loans they're going to have from the government, and that you'll see yet another surcharge on your airline ticket, as much as $2, $3 a ticket, to basically pay back the government loan. So, you'll see price ups. It'll come through very many different forms. Everybody who's expecting a V is going to be refining those figures. Q4 is going to be tough as well, and then we start to see some recovery, but significantly reduced bonuses. You're already seeing that with the airline stuff. They basically turned them off. Hiring freezes, which is great because we're past the point of layoffs, but you're going to see some hiring freezes. Margins are going to be squeezed, but you're going to start to see more stabilization. And you may start to see this, if you're starting to see it in October, you may start to see some, as we used to call in the old recovery, shoots of grass in the September timeframe. But you're gonna see that, and it's gonna be you're gonna start to see some definite signs of a turnaround as the new normal starts to take hold. The wild cards in this, and again, these are the things that cause these things to move around a lot. The results of the election, what happens in Europe. Let's hope this doesn't happen. The need for reacting to a second coronavirus, what we call the winter return. And by the way, you follow that by looking to see what happens in the Southern Hemisphere here over Southern Hemisphere over our summer, and then the effect of any increased regulations as a result of the regulatory changes. We do talk here as well about an infrastructure bill. At the end, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, so I'm going to skip on to the next slide. As I said, you'll get a copy of this, so you can, so to speak, throw tomatoes at it in the privacy of your home later. I don't mean to be Debbie Downer, and as you guys know, I'm not a downer. I'm a very optimistic guy, but this is probably what it's going to look like, so I think it's probably good to plan for it. Here's how Americans were economizing in 2017, so this is even before. More generic brands, and this is important because we'll talk about the effect of all these trends on the telecom industry. Brown bagging lunch instead of buying out. Lord knows I need to go get a haircut soon, but other people are going to the hairdresser or barber less often, and then all the other things that you see there on the page. But the point is, we're already starting to economize or thinking about it. The two I want to kind of call your attention to is canceled or cut back cable TV service. You can see even by 2017, 34% had cut back, and another 22 were thinking about it. So that's 56% that were thinking about cutting the cord. Any article you see on economizing right now, the first thing they're talking to you about is switching, or at least examining whether it's worth switching providers. And as most of us remember from the last recession, a couple well-placed phone calls could save you, $20, $30, $40 a month. Because the cable guys, in many cases, want to keep you for video. Some cases they don't. The second one I want to call your attention to is canceled or changed cell phone service. Really, in this case, it's more changing cell phone service. You can see that number is 45% have not done or considered. That's that middle bar. And that was and that's the largest middle bar you see here. That obviously shows the need to, and the importance of wireless in our economy today, and I think, frankly, the relative safety that we have. And when I'll talk to you about it, it's not completely safe, but it's probably the last thing that folks are going to be doing. There's three questions that we talk about when we talk about this. This all leads us to something we call the essential economy, and that's what we're going to be living through the next several quarters. 40% of households, somewhere around 40% of households, are going to be struggling to meet the basic needs of energy, rent, food, broadband, gasoline, healthcare, mobile phone, the things we all call the essentials. Those are the people, I mean, just taking from the previous slide, those are the people who are living paycheck to paycheck, or the people who think they're about to get laid off. And if you kind of take those two numbers, you're actually well over 40%. But right now, in that kind of an essential mode, they're not even thinking about, and they're maximizing all these ways to economize, and they're just trying to make it past that question. So got, let's call it 120 million. I know we have a few more households than that in the United States, but let's just say 48 million of those households in the United States, they're not making it past this question to the other questions. The second question for those that do are, can I live without it? So it's all the economizing things we were talking about before. Do I really need unlimited data? Can I get by with a plan that has 8, 10, 20 gigabytes? Do I need traditional cable TV? Do I need the deductible that I have on either healthcare or, and most of us went through this a decade ago, do I need the deductible I need on healthcare? Do I need the deductible I need on pick your insurance? When you go out, when we're finally able to get social again, and we're out having drinks around the bar, which shelf you going to pick, right? And it's not saying you're never going to pick top shelf. It's just saying you're going to pick it less than you probably did beforehand. My favorite one is smartphone payments. Remember, I did this slide about 4 weeks ago. I had no idea the SE was coming. But if you guys missed it, the most unfanfare-ish Apple announcement in the history of Apple happened yesterday when they announced the iPhone SE, which is going to be a great phone for many people. They just have to get used to a slightly smaller screen size. But at $399 for a brand new iPhone, before you get the value of your trade-in, it's a pretty good deal. So smartphone payments are going to be definitely on the economizing block. Brand names versus generics. All the things you do around your home that you pay people to do today, you're going to think twice about that. What I call sit-down restaurants versus quick service restaurants. All the stuff around kids. Express toll lanes, I threw that in for Colorado, versus not doing the express toll lane. Just all the things, right? You might do it less frequent. You might not do it at all. Movies. Don't know how much we'll be going to movies, but we'll be looking to find out if they have a matinee. I mean, it's all kind of common things. The point is, when that's done in total, that reduces economic growth versus where we were prior to COVID-19. The third thing, and I want you to think about this not only from a personal perspective, but also from a business perspective, is can I defer this purchase, or is it worth using savings to purchase now? And that's everything we would buy, that we would either buy on credit or payment terms, smartphones, especially 5G smartphones, especially cars, boats, vacation homes, anything you're doing, remodeling, contractor work, although what's interesting is there's an increase in that right now, apparently, because everybody's at home seeing all those projects they want to have done. Big vacations, elective surgeries. I used to work with some guys who were doing the funding behind Smile Direct, a company called Lending Point in Atlanta. There's not much they can do now, but they've really seen that drop off tremendously. Additional education. So some societal impacts on all those things. What I saw immediately, I can't go into too many details, but what I saw immediately from my consulting business was a ton of calls from folks who were putting together what I call corporate liable phone plans for their employees to use in lieu of their personal cell phone plans, and they needed certified pre-owned phones. That's what CPO means, certified pre-owned smartphones right away. And they pretty much drained the CPO business for about a week and a half, just the demand that came on when shelter in place went into place. On sale, we talked on the previous slide about what the holiday is going to look like. It's going to be pretty dismal, probably as bad as 2009 and 2010, which were the worst years for holiday retail. I'm saying things that are obvious. Luxury is out. The display of luxury is out. Simple luxuries are in. Charities are probably the biggest thing that I worry about a lot. Be a lot of impact on those. And then just remember, those who were receiving unemployment, that's draining a state coffer somewhere, right? And fortunately, we had very low unemployment for a fairly long period of time, so there's been plenty of time to build that up. I'm actually working on a report for a client right now to look at the status of the unemployment under several scenarios. So if you guys subscribe to the Sunday Brief, you'll get to see the results of that probably in, let's say, 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. Now, let me go through the impacts to the telecom sector very quickly. Online adoption, we all know that. We're all living that. Carrier stores are closing or not opening. I think Jeff Moore, if you guys are familiar with Jeff's work, Wave 7, I believe he estimated that 80% of the prepaid stores were now open nationwide, but only about 40% of the what we call postpaid stores, the traditional brand stores, were open. Now that's going to change and probably grow significantly in certain states as things continue, but just wanted to let you know that. Walmart, Straight Talk, because they've been open, they're gonna do better in retail. Apple is going to have a grand reopening. I don't know when that will be. I don't know if that'll be nationwide or by state. But knowing Apple, they're not going to do that without doing some significant promotions. And then everybody's doing investment in e-commerce systems and processes. If you're in e-commerce, you have Magento and some of the other e-commerce specialties. It's a good market to be in right now. It's a huge area right now. And even at the small business end, I have a colleague who does actually rewrote the Sunday Brief website for me. He's a well-known web designer here in Charlotte. His business is quadrupled. He's hiring students, anybody he can train to do stuff. Small business demand for online ordering, the small business demand for basic e-commerce is tremendous. It's not hard to do. It's just there's a lot of demand for it. I highlighted some plans down here. I know some of these have changed and are still changing. T-Mobile, as you guys know, as part of the merger, ended up with a $15 2 gigabyte and 25 for 5 gig. I haven't heard anything as to how that's doing, but they already have senior appeal with their senior plans. They're 2 for senior plans for $55. But that's, people are going to be economizing and saying, listen, I'll watch less video on my phone, or I'll wait till I get home to watch that video, or, maybe they'll splurge and go for a higher resolution, but a lot less than we would have seen had we not had COVID-19. The one I want to highlight for you is Mint Mobile. Most of you guys know Mint. It's the online brand from a parent company called Ultra. You have to pay in advance, but it's a very good $15 for 3 gigabytes, and they do a 12 gigabyte plan for $25 a month. And that includes hotspots. So, not promoting any of these. I'm just saying there will be opportunities to economize. AT&T, just so you know, that since this was written, matched at least through, I think Cricket matched at $15 for 2 gigs. So there's definitely a trend there. And what I didn't put on here, because obviously it just happened this week, was the great change that's happened with phone pricing and phone promotions. Give it a few more months, but if you're going to be in the phone market in a few months for a new phone, keep your eyes open. There's going to be some pretty good deals because they're not moving right now. I'm going to skip over a couple of these. As most of you guys know, wireless churn is doing. I actually think it's going to be pretty good. Many of my analyst friends disagree about the impact to Spectrum and to Xfinity. Certainly having stores closed hasn't helped them, retail store closure, but they were getting, depending on who you read, 60%, 65% online already. So they've actually been a beneficiary with their unlimited plan for $45, including taxes and fees. So really, if you kind of look at taxes and fees equivalent, that's the equivalent of a $40 unlimited plan for a single line, which is very good. And again, both Spectrum and or Charter here and Comcast, but Spectrum Mobile and Comcast, they've both been doing pretty well. Altice, as you guys know, just got started. I'll skip here. You guys have seen this. This is from Craig Moffett, but this is what's happened with traditional pay TV penetration since over the past decade. Craig has tracked this a lot. We're all doing the over/under, but I'm going for the sub 50% penetration by the time this is all done. So you're going to see a pretty meaningful downward tick. And we can talk more about that. Share of broadband net adds. I think you guys know broadband had benefited, and y'all saw it in Colorado a lot from new homes. The good news across all of this is we're not, as opposed to where we were in 2009, and y'all saw this a lot in Colorado, is that we don't have a lot of home inventory. So we're not going to see a lot of homes. It's still probably it's not going to be a great time, but there's still homes that are going to move. The homes that are out there are going to move. Business, commercial real estate, whole different story. We can talk about that later. But commercial real estate is going to be tough, really, really tough. Retail is going to be tough for the next several years. Cost of living index, you can see where Colorado is on this. This is from COWA, which is kind of the independent group that does it. I want to highlight one thing on this before we move to some conclusions. What's important here is the difference, the big difference in the cost of living index, say between a New York and a Charlotte, two big banking centers on the East Coast, or the difference between New York and Texas or California and Texas. It's still a big cost of living difference. If you think about it, for every $100 you make, or every $91 you make is a better way of saying it, in Texas, that's the equivalent of having to make, from a cost of living perspective, $138. So it's a big difference. And with, as you guys know, we're going through some very seismic shifts in our employment picture. And, we haven't seen anything like this in a while. Many of us have parents and grandparents who told stories about people just picking up and moving during the Depression. I think you're going to see a lot of that. I think a lot of people are going to move for a bunch of different reasons. But the thing I want to highlight is, even over the last decade, for every increase in population in the Northeast, and again, that's Pennsylvania and New Jersey up north, everything from Pennsylvania and New Jersey up north, they've had 18 increase in population in the South. And for every population increase they've had in the Northeast, in the West, excluding California, they've had, as you can see there, not quite 7 increase in the West, excluding California. So that's just raw numbers. That's not percentages. That's just raw numbers. I'm going to skip a couple of these, and glad to discuss them with you guys. Most of you guys have my email anyway. You can discuss them with you later. Here's a picture of, just so you know, so a lot of people ask. I had a question from a couple of you guys probably about, where do the carriers stand? Are they liquid? Are they going to be able to pay their bills? Who do we need to worry about? Who do I not need to worry about? So this was as of the 17th of March. So let's be clear. Some of these T-Mobile's changed. It probably moves into the investment grade very, very soon. Charter, as you know, is on the verge of being investment grade. And I think they will move there fairly soon. But the rest of these are the guys, as you head over to the left, and I think Frontier went bankrupt this week, it's going to be rough. It's going to be rough for those guys. And it's even rougher, not just for the employees who are living under, a pretty big cloud. It's rough for the debt holders as well, who obviously are owned in some cases by pension funds. In some cases, they got to have some gains to offset those losses. So Windstream, Frontier, as we all know, Windstream was a year ago. Frontier is now. Many people are talking about concerns about even some of the other folks that are there on towards the left or in the center. So, but those are all kind of, that's all Moody's. Actually, most of this chart is just the compilation of a table that Moody's publishes every month about the industry. Here's the bottom line. Substantial impact of 40% of consumers and 50% of small and medium business. And we all know, we see this now, so you know, you're kind of like, yeah, that's pretty much happening. You see the winners and losers there. I'm not going to read them all to you, but what's interesting to see is kind of who's in a neutral state, not as losers. Cable, Google, and Verizon, and that's Google's got some pluses and minuses. Obviously, advertising is going to be impacted, but they have, they have their tentacles into so many different other areas. I still think Apple, even with the iPhone SE, is going to be a net loser after this. As we know, the 5G phone, they haven't announced it publicly, but there are strong rumors that have not been refuted that it's delayed at least by a quarter, if not longer. Things that have been, anything that can be deferred will be deferred. Just so you guys, it's not going to affect infrastructure as much as other things. I think sub-6 gigahertz deployments are safe. I think things that have already started in the millimeter wave are safe. I think there are some millimeter wave projects that'll get pushed, not a long time, but will get pushed. But the fact they're going to happen starting in July, as many people have predicted, I think is still at high risk. We can talk a little bit about auction timing if you want to. The PAL apparently is going to happen as scheduled or rescheduled in July for CBRS. CBRS takes on a whole different value in this equation, an economizing equation. And again, I'm sure I'll get hammered by my friends at Dish that say they're not slowing down, but I think their revised plan will look a lot different than where they were. Not a lot, not like multiple quarters, but maybe a quarter or two for sure. And then you can see there kind of where my take is on the rural guys, and I think infrastructure is any type of infrastructure bill is going to do everything they can to prop up Frontier, Windstream. I use US West as my surrogate for the old US West territories. So, you know, there's some areas that are really decimated right now, and small business is going to be the final nail in the coffin for many of those guys. I wrote a whole brief about this, so I'm not going to bore you with it, but the Great American Move is going to be, you're going to see a diaspora of the dispersion of people, quite frankly, just because people don't want to be around dense urban areas the next time this thing hits, right? They'll see the difference in the quality of life and maybe they'll have the ability to work from home for a little bit longer or work from another home a little bit longer. We're going to see a lot of Made in America coming out of this, and I got to admit, I'm more globalist than a Made in America person, so, you know, throw your tomatoes at that too if you need to. But you're going to see a lot, right? We're talking now about Open RAN and some of the things that are coming out of Open RAN. We're going to see a lot of supply chain things happen in the Americas, and I think I'll use it as the Americas, including Canada. You're going to just see a lot happen in that space. I spent a long time talking to a guy at Link America. Many of you guys know Andres Russo, based out of Dallas. He's does a lot of work with AT&T, and he read this statement and said, "Yeah, phone's been ringing off the hook ever since." And there's been a lot of. It's not going to be a massive change right away, but I think more and more the design is going to be to have a balance of supply chains in case the next pandemic hits. And I'm not going to go into the radical things, but because a lot of that depends on where we go with the election. But we're going to enter a much more regulated economy. We're going to enter a much more government-assisted economy, and those things are different. They're different than what we've seen previously, and we need to kind of think about how that impacts our respective businesses and how that impacts our respective customers. Well, with that, Dan, I'm going to turn it back over for questions.
Great. Appreciate it, Jim. So yeah, so anyone that has questions, again, just a reminder, you can, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can either click raise your hand if you want to ask it live, or you can type it into the Q&A panel. I do have a few questions that have been submitted, so let me grab these for you, Jim. So far they're all for Jim. This one is from Adam. Adam asks, do you think a new precedent has been set for how the United States will react to future events?
That's a deep question. It requires a drink. So I'm going to take one.
Cheers.
Cheers. Adam, I am a student of history. I want to shamelessly promote a book, since we all might have time to read. Unfortunately, it's not on Audible. This is it. It's called The Intel Trinity. It was written a few years ago by Michael Malone. And the thing that's most interesting about this is it describes where Silicon Valley was post-World War II. And as most of you guys know, and there's a great accompanying video in the American Experience about the early days of Silicon Valley. And what I think about there, and this is a little deep, apologize, but I think about what's the next, we come out of this, obviously we don't have to rebuild a ton of infrastructure because we haven't been bombed. We still have high unemployment, and we will have infrastructure needs, meaning physical build needs. We'll have growth in certain areas, certain geographic areas of the economy. But the biggest issue, Adam, I'll leave you with this to kind of think through, is you're going to have a lot of computing, and you're going to have not a lot of time to construct the next DNA sequencing for the next virus that hits. Let's hope it's a while to be solved. And you're going to be doing a lot more databasing of what we call test DNA. Much like, and I'll use it as an example, after I left Sprint, I had a small company that developed an app that really did caller ID right. And we developed a lot of patents, and we ended up selling the company. But before we sold the company, we were doing about $150,000 a month in recurring revenues. And it was basically an enhanced caller ID. But before we released a version of the software, this is 2010, 2011, we had to test it across a variety of phones to make sure that it worked. Well, we didn't have the whole cadre of phones. If you guys remember, there was a T-Mobile version of the Samsung Galaxy. There was a AT&T. We didn't have money to buy all those phones. We could do a BlackBerry, and we could do a couple Apple phones, and we probably had 15 or so in-house that we actively tested with. But we had to remote test that. And I think what you're going to see is with this DNA sequencing and other things, you're going to see a large need for very high-powered computing. You're going to see a large need for more work from home. And you guys have probably been bombarded by articles about work from home, so I'm not going to go into that. But the next thing to solve for, the next micro processor that you're going to see, because again, out of that from Silicon Valley came out of this came, the need for, microchips, computing. I mean, that's what came out of World War II. And I think I'm fairly optimistic, but it's less about better processors. It's more about solving specific needs and being able to resolve and come up with vaccinations and cures a lot faster. So I think what's going to happen is all the biomedical stuff that you've seen, all the biogenetic stuff that you've seen, is now going to get smushed together really hard with quantum computing and cloud computing. And I know that it may seem obvious to a lot of people, but the magnitude of that's going to happen is going to be phenomenal.
Good. All right. Actually, and I'll add to that real quick. a couple other follows that might kind of address this question that I'm familiar with. There's a gentleman by the name of George Friedman, has a number of books. He's kind of a geopolitical prognosticator. So he may be someone good to follow on Twitter or read some of his books. One of his most recent books is The Next 100 Years. That's a good one. That's worth checking out. Yep. So check that out. And then I just lost what the other one was. It was the top of my head. If I remember, I'll let you know. We'll move on to another question. And by the way, you all should be seeing a event survey. You don't need to answer it now. You can wait till we're done. We'll leave it up. But feel free to answer that. That'll help us understand how this was for you guys. Next question is kind of a two-part. It asks, what's your prediction, Jim, for telecom spending to pick up, and is COVID stopping it?
Well, depends on what period you look at. So for this year, I think everything is safe. Absent millimeter wave, and we talked a little bit about whether millimeter wave is going to take off or not. I think then you need to look to see what's in the infrastructure bill. I've seen I lived through the BTOP. Most of us who are on the phone who are over 40 years old lived through the BTOP, Broadband Technology Opportunities Program. And in the BTOP, we spent $7 billion. The infrastructure bill, the amount allocated for infrastructure in the bill that I've been kind of helping folks think through is $100 billion. And that's a pared down version of what was $150 billion. You know, and boy, the BTOP was such a bear to manage. And you know, depending on who you read, there's a good New York Times article. I have it in the Sunday Brief, a couple of links to it. You know, 14, 15, 16% of it was totally frittered away. And that means people applied for funds and literally did nothing with them. Spent them on something, but they didn't spend them on infrastructure. And then you have guys like the Eagle. We all know that in Colorado and the Zayo debacle of Eagle. You know, you worry a little bit about the efficiency of it. I'm trusting that they'll get a little bit better on how they do with allocation of funds. But it depends on what happens there. Really, frankly, I see Verizon is doing such a great job of approaching municipalities now and saying, can we dig up the street while nobody's here? And many municipalities, not all, but many municipalities are saying, sure, go ahead and dig it up. So there should be some short-term increased activity, frankly. What happens in rural T-Mobile, I think T-Mobile over the next 3 to 6 months, the T-Mobile and Dish activity is going to drive a lot more spending than any sort of short-term government stimulus. That's what I would look for.
Great. And I just remembered what the second book I was thinking about that's somewhat related. It's called The Future is Faster Than You Think. Really great book that just came out about the convergence of technology going on right now. And, you know, that's going to somewhat counteract and somewhat aid with what we're going through because technologies are converging so fast right now. So that's another good read. Another question we have here is, what's your prediction for T-Mobile to start spending money?
Yes. They've already started. So if you haven't seen it yet, you should be seeing it shortly. Yes. It's going to happen soon. If you're not seeing it yet, then there's something wrong. So should be seeing it very shortly.
Great. Let's see, we just had another one came in. Well, it's from Jeff, and it says,
I'm smiling as my dog started barking, so that was my dog barking, not anybody else's.
So we have a question from Jeff. Jeff asks, Jeff asks, Jim, I'm seeing a lot of activity with WISPs in rural areas. It's been a long time coming. Do you feel this is just coincidence, or has there been a push from government to actually use all of the rural broadband funds that have been awarded in the past 2 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd be interested. By the way, I want to throw something back for those of you who are tracking, because I could stand some new data on this. Sorry, I was kicking the dog out. 600 megahertz spectrum, for those of you, I follow the Reddit threads, but if you guys have any specific increases in 600 or even AWS3, apparently there's some deployments going on there with both Verizon and AT&T. Send them my way, or send them Dan's way, and Dan can send them on to me. So, but as far as what's going on with WISP, I think people are desperate for solutions in rural areas, and they're finally waking up to the fact that WISPs are not, two guys in a garage. They're, many of them are fairly sophisticated operations, and they actually know what they're doing. So I think they're seeing that there might be some more validity there.
Great. That's it for questions. Are there any other questions? If anyone has a question, you can click raise your hand, or you could submit it through Q&A. If you haven't already, take a look at the poll that should be on your screen. Would appreciate getting feedback from everybody. So far, we've got about half of the folks that are on that have answered that. Would be great to get more feedback on how you guys thought this event has been. It's our first ever virtual learning event. In some ways, there's a lot of good things coming out of what's going on right now. I don't know that we would have ever thought to do this if it wasn't for circumstances. So,
Hey, Dan, I think I see one more in the chat window there.
Oh, it's in the chat window. It's from, okay, so Wayne is asking, what is your expectation with regards to Starlink, and how do you think it will impact other providers?
It's a great question, Wayne. You ask a great question. I've been asked to think about it. I just haven't had a lot of time to put on it. I can tell you this: that's a lot of satellites they're putting in the air, and they're going to be carrying a lot of data. Either that, or there are going to be a lot of really pissed off bondholders. So, it's one of the two things. So I think where Elon's headed is it's going to be more oriented towards rural. That's what we're hearing. But there's some of us that said we're not quite sure what rural means. Does rural mean Statesville, North Carolina, which is 25 miles north of Charlotte? Yeah, it might be rural. But the question is it AT&T DSL territories? And I've been doing a lot of work right now on kind of mapping out fiber versus DSL for AT&T. Is it just those DSL territories as an alternative to cable? I don't know. I can tell you this: it's the laws of physics don't change. So if you need really low latency, it's not going to be as good a solution. That said, I am taking my father-in-law in an hour through his first Zoom meeting, and he's going to be doing it over Usenet. So we'll see how it works. I got a feeling that this is it's going to be an interesting deployment. I'm not going to say it's going to be a success, but I think it's going to be a lot more impactful than people think. How's that?
All right. We did have a couple others. Just one was Chris saying thanks and for doing this, and Chris, thanks for joining, and everyone else for joining. And then Polly asks if the deck will be shared. Absolutely, we will share the deck. We'll also share the video. So others that weren't able to make it will be able to see what they missed out on and join us for the next one. So,
hey, Dan?
Yeah.
The question from John says, you consider the top 3 tower companies investment grade?
Man, I'm telling you, I spent a lot of time pouring through what I think Crown Castle looks like. I feel better about American Tower than Crown Castle of the two. I haven't looked at SBA yet, so I can't go there. I can tell you this: and I don't think this is posturing. I don't think this is mono kind of things between the tower companies and the carriers. I think there is genuinely a growing divide between the objectives of the carriers and the towers, and I'm a little concerned by it, frankly, because I think they need each other more than we think they do, and I'm not quite sure what the alternative is. Is it a was it Tillman, or is it, is it some other new party that just kind of emerges, or is it just, a different way of looking through, I do some work with Airwaves here in town. Airwaves, AIRWAVZ here in town that does a lot in building. Is it just more in building to get more out of the existing towers? I'm not sure. I wish I had a really good answer to your question. I can tell you this. Crown Castle has a lot of underutilized assets. They got work to do, but they're going to be a strong company. They're under long-term agreements. I'm not that concerned about the value of the company per se. It's just I'm more concerned as you look at valuation of any company. You look at short-term earnings, and then you look at the value of what's the long-term growth prospects. And something's got to give in that relationship. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but something's got to give in that relationship.
Great.
I wish I had better news. I'm usually ebullient and happy and really happy at the happy hour, but it's a pretty bleak situation, and I think it's important that as an industry we react appropriately. And it's very important. By the way, that's not out of fear or despair. We're, as you saw from that slide, we're the thing everybody wants. I mean, the dependency on mobile and the dependency on broadband have never been higher in our society and will continue to be throughout this year. It's a miracle. I didn't put it in here, but it's a miracle that the infrastructure has stood the test of time. Both the cloud infrastructure, the last mile infrastructure. Sure, we've had issues. Absolutely, we've had issues. But have we had massive, what I call rolling brownouts like you saw in the electrical grid during certain things? No. And if you think back, if you want to go back to it, go back to 9/11, and let's talk about who could use their phone on September 11th. No one. September 12th, barely anybody. Right? This is a much different infrastructure picture than we had 10 years ago. It's a much different infrastructure picture than we had 20 years ago. And I do want to leave you on that, is we're essential to the recovery, very essential to the recovery. The question is, are we approaching it from, and are we setting the correct expectations with the how we recover, where we recover, and frankly, if we're going to spend some government money, that we're spending it in the right places, on the right infrastructure.
Right. Yeah, I agree. They're talking about, round 3 or round 4 of recovery funds being infrastructure based. And boy, if it is, I sure hope we do it right. I sure hope we look at infrastructure holistically and not as a bunch of separate projects. And that telecom needs to be a big part of that. So it'll be interesting to watch. So Ryan, I want to throw it over to you and or Brett, if you guys have some stuff you'd like to wrap us up with.
No, I can't thank you guys enough. Again, Dan, Brett, for putting this together, Jim, for all of the valuable insights. I know I'll be sitting down studying the deck myself, and probably over a few cocktails at this point. But yeah, we ultimately, we know we need to play it smart. We need to make some really good decisions right now. We're certainly at the front end of this based on the information you've shared today, but that information is extremely valuable and going to be helpful for us all. I want to thank everybody for joining. I don't know what our final numbers are, but I'm certainly looking forward to hearing about it and touting that. And again, we couldn't have done this without all of these great members and great sponsors. So Brett, anything you want to wrap it up with?
I do. Can everybody turn their cameras on, please, and grab your drink and toast Jim, because that was fantastic.
I'm catching up with turning everybody's permissions on.
I know Dan's turning us all on, and guys, I don't know if you know this, but got a couple of you guys on.
Yeah, I'm getting there. You guys will see.
I know you got to turn everybody on individually, right?
All right, here we go.
Our first Zoom webinar, but by the way, Zoom really helped us out here. They gave us a free webinar account to try this out, so I want to give a shout out to them because it was pretty good of them to do that. I got half the guys on. Hey, Jim, we really appreciate you. You came out to Colorado in February. You're here now. Just keep doing what you're doing.
Glad to do it.
It's fantastic for us. So.